Got a Gen 3 engine here on the left, and I've got a customer's Gen 4 engine on the right. Both engines have come to us for work. The Gen 3 is for an overhaul, and the Gen 4 has had a prop strike, so it's a bulk strip as well. So both engines have had the crankshafts removed, which means full teardown. So we can, the objective here is obviously to rebuild the engines for the customers, but for my own curiosity, I wanted to make direct comparisons between the Gen 3, which is everything on that side of the bench, and the Gen 4, which is everything on that side of the bench. Now these are complete engines. Now the ignition leads and some of the other bits and pieces have been put away, the intake pipes and exhaust. That's not really what we're interested in here. But we are interested in what between the two engines is the same and what is different. Now I can say from the outset that both engines do share the exact same design philosophy, in that there are, you know, the layout of the camshaft, the crankshaft, the lifters, and you know, the accessory sections are all identical philosophies. However, there are slight differences in the designs, although there are many similarities, and in fact there are many items that are identical. For instance, if we start here with the sumps are identical. The Gen 3 is the one with the oil cooler on it, but that's just been adapted, added later. But the castings of the sump and all the machining, the bolt holes, all are identical. They all line up with the same crankcase. You could physically swap them over. The intake pipe runner on the Gen 3, which is the dirty one here, with the oil cooler on it, this is the Gen 3, and the intake pipe, plenum on both are also the same and machined the same. So there's no difference there at all on the sumps, which means that the bottom of the crankcases is the same as far as the drilling and tapping and machining for the sumps to mount. Also, interestingly, the camshaft and the crankshaft between the Gen 4 there and the Gen 3 here, they're identical, literally the same. And I'll demonstrate later by taking the Gen 3 crankshaft and putting it into the Gen 4 crankcase. It will fit, I've already tested it, it fits, the camshaft fits, the centered distance are the same. Everything there is identical, which is interesting. But we'll go through some of these pieces independently, but for the moment I'll just go a bit of an overview here. Now clearly the biggest difference between the engines is the cylinder and head assemblies. Now the Gen 3, similar to the Gen 2 and Gen 1, have a steel cylinder, chromoly, with an attached cylinder head, aluminium. And that's pretty common for aircraft, you know, design, isn't it? But the Gen 4 engine, of course, the massive departure is that it has a all aluminium cylinder and cylinder head, which although they are two pieces, they are considered one. They're attached by threading them together, and the Jabiru process is probably shrinking and lining up, but that Jabiru consider them one piece. In other words, they're not supposed to come apart. Now the way they've done this is, I'll grab this cylinder here. I'm working with one hand, so I'll try not to do any major damage here, or any damage. So what we've got here is, inside there, that what I'm touching there is, this is an all aluminium casting, but what we've got there is what's called a Nickel coating. Now that Nickel coating is extremely hard, but it's very thin. It's only a couple of thou, 2 or 3, maybe 4 thou, I think, maximum thickness. So it's just a flashing. It's an electrolysis or an electro process of plating, and it's been honed. Somehow they do that, and it's pretty much permanent, but it's really glass hard. The downside is if you ever have a problem, like a failed piston or anything, you know, harsh go through the cylinder, you're going to tear through that lining and you're straight into the aluminium, and then you cook your cactus. So from a resilience standpoint, the steel cylinders are more hardy. They can take a lot more abuse and punishment. They can be rehoned. They can be bored if you need to, and they can take a lot of punishment. Even if, you know, debris went through there, it might put some scores down the cylinder, but it's not going to destroy the engine. The same couldn't be said here. These Nickel cylinders, even though they're up to the job, they're very sensitive to any damage to the surface, because once you damage the surface of that cylinder, you're through to the aluminium casting, and an aluminium piston running on an aluminium surface is not going to last long. It's going to gall instantly. cause you a seizure, all sorts of problems. But the upside of the Nikasil aluminium cylinder is it expands at the same rate as the engine and the piston, so that you can actually run a tighter tolerance between the piston and the barrel and the head, or the barrel more so, because the cylinder is expanding at the same rate as the aluminium piston. Now the pistons on these Gen 4s is the same as all the Gen 3, I should say, is the same as the Gen 4. Now the earlier Gen engines are also the same piston, but they don't have the valve recesses. But the later engines do. And in fact, the piston I'm holding here would pretty much go into most of the Jabiru engines, except for the very early ones. In fact, any of the 22 and 3300 engines, this piston would fit. You see it's got the valve recesses, making it a non-interference engine. Whereas the earlier engines didn't have that. So if a valve ever stuck, it would hit the piston and cause problems, bend the valve, maybe even knock the poppet off. So the pistons on the two engines are the same. Now the conrods between the two engines are identical. The big end bearing and the little end bore is the same. The centre distance is the same. The way the cap screws work is the same. The forged conrod, which I'm holding here, this is a Gen 4 conrod, takes apparently a different, or not apparently, it does specify a different torque spec for the cap bolts here. Why, I don't know. But that's just how it is. Now the conrod on the other engines, the Gen 3, is this one here, is all billet machined. Chromoly steel, but billet machined. But it's exactly the same as this conrod. In fact, the conrods would be interchangeable. I'm pretty certain of that. There's no difference. It's just that this is forged and that one's billet. Now the crankcase is another big feature. The crankcase is machined exactly the same. As I said earlier, the camshaft and the crankshaft will fit into either engine. So all the machining is identical. And interestingly, the pitching for the cylinder mounting is also the same as the earlier gen engines. I actually tested that before. I put this cylinder here, even though the spigot's a different diameter, because the aluminium Nikasil's got a thicker wall here for strength, whereas the thin wall there doesn't. So what they've done on the Gen 4 engine is they've machined out this. I'll just turn this one over here, or this one here. I'm working with one hand, so bear with me. I don't want to do any damage. So you see those bolt spacings there for the cylinders? They're identical to the Gen 3 here and the earlier Jabiru engines. See that? That bolt spacing is the same. The only difference is, on the Gen 4 engine, they've machined out this spigot right up to the edge. Now they use the same diameter studs, the 7/16 studs, but they've bored it right out to the edge. I'll talk to you in a minute why. You see this one's not quite there. But the reason that they've done that, and they're also using a smaller O-ring, because they need to get this bigger girth here. And the reason this wall thickness is thicker is because it's aluminium. It's not as strong as the steel. The steel can be machined a lot thinner. So what they've done is they've machined that out, but the bolt spacings are the same. So if you took an early cylinder like this one, the steel one off the Gen 3, and I did this before, and you put that on there, the studs will line up. The crankcase width is the same, the deck heights are the same, everything's the same in that regards. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. So one of the first things I did when I pulled it apart is I put a crankshaft and a camshaft. I put the Gen 3 crankshaft and camshaft in that engine, and vice versa. I put the Gen 4 camshaft and crankshaft, laid it in that crankcase, and they fitted perfectly, exactly the same, no difference. Anyway, I might wrap it up there. I'll set up a few demos and we'll come back. All right, we're back again doing some more comparisons. Now the oil pump assembly, the one on the left there is the Gen 3 and the one on the right there is the Gen 4. Now the pumps will fit, again, will interchange with either engine, best I can tell. Again, I'll preface this by saying none of what I'm saying is gospel. This is just my early interpretations and my best guesstimation. I have done some measurements, but nothing's been proven. But I've got a pretty good eye for this sort of stuff. And I would say without any doubt, the two pumps, assuming the Woodruff key is the same diameter, which it looks like it is, you could swap the pumps around. Now, a couple of differences. On the Gen 4 here, what they've done is they've put an extra O-ring here, which is a nice touch. There's an O-ring go here, I've removed it, but this same as there. But you see this doesn't have the O-ring on the outside. This one does. Interestingly though, I still find it, you know, sort of a little bit perplexing that even with the introduction of an O-ring, someone's still slathering Loctite or 515 over everything, when it really shouldn't be necessary if these O-rings are designed to function. I mean, there's not much point putting an O-ring in the design if you're going to smother it in 515. You might as well just stay with what you had. But anyway, I guess they're just trying to be absolutely certain, but it does defeat the purpose. But the big interesting thing on the oil pumps is the Gen 4 oil pump's got a 5-lobe gear. You see there? And the Gen 4 has got a 4-lobe gear on the inner and a 5 on the outer. This has got a 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 there, and 1, 2, 3, and 6 there. Which I thought was interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 6, and this is 4 and 5. So clearly the Gen 4 pump is probably going to move more volume and at a finer resolution pulsing wise. You won't get as much pulsing with this pump. Now interestingly, I would think that this pump would fit any Jabiru engine, certainly the Gen 3. These pumps would be interchangeable. So there's your oil pump. Alright, so now I'm back with the cylinders, or I'm really focusing on the cylinder heads here. So there's our cylinder, Gen 4. And as I said earlier, you've got your aluminium barrel here and your aluminium cylinder head here, and they've been screwed together permanently. Nikasil lining in there. And there on the right is the cylinder head off the Gen 3, which you typically see on most of the earlier Jabirus. The comparison here is the combustion chambers, and they look to be the same. Same size valves, spark plugs in the same position, and the shape of the combustion chamber is identical. Same as the one on the Gen 3 here. So the Gen 3 chamber is the same as the chamber on the Gen 4, which makes sense. Same valves. I also found it quite interesting that I reckon you could easily work that head. I don't know about changing the valve seats. Guys, you possibly could with care, but you could certainly grind them. There's pretty good access to those valves. They're on a nice angle. The angle's not too steep that you couldn't get a tool in there. The bore's huge, 97 millimeters plus, and those valves aren't on a very steep angle, as you can see. So you could quite easily get a tool in there and work those valves. So removing the cylinder head is not really that big a deal. I believe you could quite comfortably change the guides, possibly even the seats with care. I don't know how you'd go machining new pockets, but you could certainly do some head work. I'm pretty confident on that. But yeah, so there you go. The cylinder heads, or the combustion chambers I should say, are the same. Or at least the Gen 3 are same as the Gen 4. Now of course, this engine has the same bore and stroke as all of the Jabirus. It's 6 cylinders of 3300, so same bore, same stroke. Here's another interesting comparison, is the way the intake pipes on the Gen 4 are attached compared to the earlier engines. Now we all know how the earlier engine intake pipes and exhausts are attached. They literally use these bolts here, and they use a gasket on the inlet pipe, and it has a tapered seat on the exhaust there. So a tapered sort of seal there, and that's actually part of the exhaust pipe. Again, on the inlet side, you've got bolts as you do on the exhaust side, and that holds the manifolds to the head. Now what they've done on the Gen 4 is really quite nice. So on the inlet side, they've got this big substantial O-ring here. Hopefully that'll take the heat. Time will tell. And that nestles into that little recess there, you see, and gives you a perfect seal. And then on the exhaust side, you've got the same situation, but you're using a copper ring, like a copper O-ring. Obviously it's for the extra heat. and that again nestles on that side there. And both the inlet pipe and the exhaust pipe are attached to the head by this bridge. This substantial forging steel bolts to that thread in the middle there, and you pull that down and it simultaneously clamps the exhaust and the inlet. Now it looks fantastic and it's a really good idea, and it's certainly a lot more convenient to take one bolt as opposed to trying to work underneath the engine, getting these pesky little bolts out, which is always awkward because there's so much stuff in the way. You've got pipes and things all getting in the way, and it's very difficult, where this is going to be a doddle. But I will say this, one of my customers, Jenny, we just sent her on her way recently, and her engine turned out it was having a pretty bad exhaust gas leak. She called me and said that she had her carbon monoxide through the roof when she was taxiing. When she was flying it was all right, but when she was taxiing it was really bad. And I told her to check this because we didn't actually get involved with any of the engine work on the Gen 4. And I said to her, I bet you that you're probably getting a chronic leak on one of these. It might have backed off. And I bet you there would be a propensity, particularly for a new engine, for this to back off. Now I told her to check that and I haven't heard from her since, so I assume that was it. So by tightening that up, you'll fix your exhaust leaks. Because I reckon that on a first tightening, that copper O-ring there, or that copper seal, would back off, would crush and probably lose seal. Something to keep an eye on. I don't know for sure, but I'm only speculating that could come loose or slacken off and then gases start flowing out. I'll have to see how she went with that. But anyway, it's a great idea. As long as it works, it's a fantastic idea. It's a hell of a lot more convenient to work with just one bolt, clamping the inlet and the exhaust pipe down, than all of these bolts, each for each port, which, as I said, working underneath the engine is extremely pesky. This is a great idea. Alright, so this will be interesting. So on the left here, we have the fully machined from billet material Gen 3 crankcase, 3300. And on the right hand side, we have the casting of the Gen 4 crankcase. Again, a 3300 6-cylinder. Now you can see the pressure relief valve is in the same spot. The camshaft tunnels, the lifters, the roller lifters, same lifters on both engines. They both use a roller lifter cam, the Gen 3 and the Gen 4. And you can see it's all machined the same. The only difference is, of course, is this is a casting, so there's no machining in the cast areas that don't need machining. There's only machining on the surfaces that need it. Whereas, of course, the billet crankcase is machined completely all over from a big chunk of aluminium. And one of the problems with machining a crankcase, and believe me, I know this because my own radials have similar problems. You've got to be very careful with your machine strategy, and you also have to, or we do, stress relieve at certain points during the machine process, because when you start removing huge chunks of material from a solid billet, the material seems to it relieves itself. The structure of the material, when you're moving big chunks of mass, it starts to distort. And so what we do is we machine the bulk of the crankcase on our radials, for instance, and we leave a little bit behind so we can clean up after the stress relieving's been done. We send the crankcases out for stress relieving, they come back, they've relaxed, and then we machine them accurately. If you don't do that on your first run, you can get distortion of the part, or the part can relax and warp before you've even used it. That's not so much of a problem on a cast crankcase because it's cast fully sectioned out and it goes through casting process and heat treatment. So from that standpoint, even though billet material is very strong, I'm going to say that the cast crankcase is structurally more sound. Well, what's the word I'm trying to find? From a measuring standpoint, it's dimensionally more stable because of the process. But the machining, as I said earlier, the machining is all the same. All the machine detail is all the same. So anyway, with any further ado, let's get a crankshaft. This is the Gen 3 crankshaft. It's got the dirty end on it. And this is the Gen 4 crankshaft. It's got the clean end on it. It's brand new. The cam gear is the same. Or the crank gear is the same. The camshaft is the same. trust me, everything on that front is the same. The only difference I noticed is on the earlier engines, they typically safety wire them there, whereas I noticed on the Gen 4 cam, no safety wire, it's just washers and Loctite. That's good enough. I love their Loctite. All right, so let's take the Gen 3 crank and put it in the Gen 4, and at the same time, I'll take the Gen 4 crank and place it carefully in the Gen 3 case, just to prove the point, so you actually see what's really happening. And what I've done is I've just put a bearing shell, main bearing shell at each end, just to support it, give it something to run on there. Righto, back in a sec. All right, take a look at this. This is marvellous. So what we have here is the billet engine, 3300 Gen 3, but we've put the Gen 4 crankshaft in it and the Gen 4 camshaft in it. And look at that, fits perfectly, spins free as a bird, cam spinning, everything's turning. I've just got a bearing shell there and one at the end, and it fits perfectly. I haven't got the thrust bearings in, but that's perfect. Exactly the same, no difference at all. And here we have the Gen 3 crankshaft and the Gen 3 camshaft. You might recall earlier I had the safety wire there. And again, same deal, spinning beautifully, look at that. So yeah, they're identical. The lifters, this is the Gen 3 lifters here. The roller lifters, same deal. Sorry, did I say Gen 3? Gen 4. I'm getting confused. Gen 3, Gen 4. Yep, so they'll fit either engine. See there. And on this side, this is the Gen 3 stuff. Same deal. And the pushrod tube adapters that go on the crankcase, the Gen 3 are machined from billet, and the Gen 4 are a casting. But they're the same. I tested both pushrods in them, and they'll fit on either engine, the bolt spacing the same. So they're identical as well. That's really interesting, that. One of the things that's slightly different on the crankcase is that on the Gen 4 they've cast the seal carrier for the propeller, or the end of the crankshaft, the prop seal. The oil seal is retainer is cast into the crankcase, whereas on the Gen 3 and all the earlier Jabiru engines, the seal carrier is a separate piece like this. But dimensionally, the only difference is that this piece here is the equivalent of that casting there, but the shafts are the same. Also, it's got the latest drive dowels for the prop flange, and likewise on the rear for the flywheel. It's got the same bolts, it's got the same alignment pin and the drive dowels. Same on the Gen 3 here, the rusty one. Same deal, except that one's got the pin. This one's got the locating pin for the timing, where this one's missing. It doesn't really matter if it's missing, you've just got to be careful when you put it together that you don't mix it up. Interesting, this Gen 4 engine, when we pulled it apart, it didn't have the alignment pin. No big deal. Another interesting feature of the engine is on the Gen 3, the engine mount is an all billet plate, and the gearbox for the distributors, the magnetos, is machined from billet, and you've got your shafts here. These are no, these weren't the shafts. And you see actually these shafts here have got the earlier rotor button style with the key on it and all the epoxy glue on there, they glue them on. But on the later Gen 4, it's a lot more intricate with these magneto posts for the coils integral, and the shafts are the same, although they have the threaded rotor button attachment, which is what you saw me screaming and yelling about the other day, or the previous video when these were seized because they use Loctite. But the gearing is the same, the gear is the same, the shaft is virtually the same, except they're using a different rotor button and a different attachment method. This casting here actually is the same, very, very close to the billet one there. So this is the casting off the Gen 4, and this is a Gen 3 engine mount, or accessory plate. And every bolt lines up perfectly, and all the center distances between the crank and the gears are the same. And these 4 bolts are the same, and all of these bolts are the same. The only 2 that are different are these 2. They've been drilled and tapped in a different position. They're the only 2 that aren't right. These 2 here. They're out of position. Yeah, these 2 are out. See? That one and that one. But all this one here, that one, all these, this one, and the 4 across the bottom, they're all the same. It's just those 2 and those 2. But the center distances are identical. And that's so that's that. And the another thing I noticed too is when I was pulling the engine apart, one of the really nice features of the Gen 4 was you could actually take the sump off without removing the accessory plate. On the earlier Jabirus, like the Gen 3 and earlier, you can't get the sump off because there's 2 captive bolts that you can't get to. Or maybe, yeah, I'm pretty sure the Gen 3, but certainly a lot of the earlier ones. You can't get the sump off because there are 2 bolts hidden behind this accessory plate and you can't get it off. Whereas the Gen 4, and I was pretty confident they'd changed it, and they had. You could take all the sump bolts out and the 4 across the back here, and you could take the sump off, which was really good. It means you don't have to pull the entire back of the engine apart to get the sump off. You could actually take the sump off on the aeroplane, which is really nice, nice feature. It's convenient if you ever need to work on the engine. Whereas on the earlier engines, you got to take the engine off, you got to pull the accessory plate off because you can't get the sump off. So that's a nice touch on the Gen 4.